We live in such a curious time. Modern man believes he can reach God through doctrine, through ritual, through the accumulation of knowledge about the divine. He thinks salvation lies in understanding theology, in memorizing scripture, in following the prescribed paths that others have laid out before him. But what if I told you that this entire approach, this whole magnificent structure of organized religion, is actually keeping you further from God than you have ever been? I have spent my life studying the human soul, watching how it moves, how it dreams, how it yearns. And I can tell you this with absolute certainty. The divine does not live in your church. It does not hide in your holy books. It does not wait for you in your prayers, at least not in the way you think it does. The divine lives where you least expect to find it, in the very places you have been taught to avoid, to suppress, to deny. Let me share something with you that will sound strange at first. God speaks most clearly through what we refuse to hear. The voice of the divine whispers loudest in our darkness, in our pain, in those aspects of ourselves that we find most unacceptable. You see, we have been conditioned to believe that holiness means purity, that connection with God requires the elimination of everything we consider base or shameful or difficult. But this is the great illusion of our time. This belief that we must become perfect before we can approach the sacred. This notion that God dwells only in light and never in shadow. I have seen too much, felt too deeply to accept such a shallow understanding of the divine mystery. Think about it for a moment. When do you feel most alive? When do you sense something greater than yourself moving through your existence? Is it during your polite Sunday services when you are performing the role of the good Christian, the dutiful believer? Or is it in those raw moments when life strips away your pretenses and you stand naked before the mystery of your own being? I remember years ago sitting with a patient who had lost everything. His wife had left him, his business had failed, his children would not speak to him. He came to me broken, desperate, convinced that God had abandoned him completely. And in that brokenness, in that complete collapse of everything he thought he was, something extraordinary happened. He began to see clearly for the first time in his life. You see, his suffering had burned away all the false constructions, all the elaborate defenses he had built around his ego. And in that empty space, something real could finally emerge. Not the God of his childhood prayers, not the deity of his religious education, but something far more immediate and alive. The divine as it actually exists, not as we wish it would exist. This is what most people cannot understand. God is not separate from your darkness. God is not waiting for you to clean yourself up before making contact. The divine is present in every aspect of your being, especially in those parts you have been taught to reject. Your anger, your lust, your fear, your greed, these are not obstacles to spiritual connection. They are the very material through which the sacred works. But here is where it becomes dangerous to speak truthfully, because once you understand this, once you see that the divine permeates everything, including what you call evil, you can no longer participate in the comfortable divisions that most religions offer. You can no longer point at others and say, they are the problem while you are the solution. You can no longer pretend that God belongs to your group and not to theirs. This terrifies people. They want their God to be on their side, to validate their choices, to condemn their enemies. They want religion to make them feel special, chosen, superior. But the God I have encountered in the depths of the human psyche, the divine that reveals itself in dreams and symptoms and the dark night of the soul. This God belongs to no one and everyone simultaneously. When you truly connect with the divine, you discover something that will shake you to your core. You are not who you think you are. The person you have constructed, the identity you defend so fiercely, the roles you play so convincingly, these are all temporary costumes worn by something far more vast and mysterious. There is a presence within you that existed before your birth and will continue after your death. There is an intelligence operating through your life that is not your personal intelligence. There is a love moving in your heart that is not your individual love. And this presence, this intelligence, this love, this is what we mean when we speak of God. But you cannot reach this divine core through your will alone. You cannot think your way into sacred connection. You cannot perform the right rituals or believe the correct doctrines and manufacture an authentic relationship with the divine. It comes only through surrender, through a willingness to let everything you think you know about yourself and about God dissolve into something larger. This surrender is not passive resignation. It is the most active thing you will ever do. It requires tremendous courage to face the parts of yourself you have spent a lifetime avoiding. It demands extraordinary honesty to admit that your carefully constructed spiritual life might be nothing more than an elaborate defense against real transformation. I have watched people spend decades in prayer, yet never once encounter the divine. I've seen them memorize every verse, attend every service, follow every commandment, and remain as spiritually empty as when they began. Why? Because they are trying to reach God with the very part of themselves that cannot make the journey. The ego, you see, is a magnificent creation. It organizes your daily life, helps you navigate the world, gives you a sense of continuity and purpose. But the ego is also the great pretender. It believes it can negotiate with the infinite, bargain with the eternal, make deals with the sacred. And this is where most spiritual seeking goes astray. Your ego approaches God like a merchant approaching a customer. It offers good behavior in exchange for blessing. It promises devotion in return for security. It presents its spiritual accomplishments like credentials for admission into some divine club. But God is not impressed by your resume. The sacred cannot be bought, earned, or achieved through effort. There is another way, a path that most people find too frightening to walk. It begins with a recognition that shakes the very foundation of your spiritual life. You must understand that everything you consider most holy about yourself, everything you are most proud of in your relationship with God, these very things might be the obstacles preventing real connection. Your righteousness, your piety, your spiritual knowledge, these can become the most sophisticated forms of separation from the divine. They create a false self that believes it deserves God's attention, that has earned divine favor through its goodness. But this false self, no matter how polished and perfect, cannot touch the sacred because it is built on the illusion of separation. I remember working with a priest who came to me in great distress. He had spent 30 years serving God faithfully, yet felt more distant from the divine than ever before. His prayers felt empty. His faith seemed hollow, and he was beginning to doubt everything he had believed. In our sessions, something remarkable emerged. Beneath his priestly robes, beneath his learned theology, beneath his years of service, lived a man who had never allowed himself to be seen by God. He had been so busy being holy that he had forgotten how to be human. He had constructed such an elaborate spiritual identity that his actual soul had no room to breathe. And God, you see, is not interested in your spiritual performance. The divine wants to meet you, not your idea of who you should be. This is why the mystics throughout history have spoken of the dark night of the soul. This is why every authentic spiritual tradition includes periods of apparent abandonment, of feeling utterly lost and alone. These are not punishments or tests. They are invitations. Invitations to let go of everything you think you know about connecting with God and discover what lies beneath your carefully constructed spiritual life. When everything falls away, when your prayers turn to dust in your mouth, when your faith crumbles and your certainties dissolve, something extraordinary becomes possible. You might finally meet the God who has been waiting patiently behind all your ideas about God. Not the deity of your imagination, not the projection of your needs and fears, but the living presence that has been breathing through you all along. But here is what makes this path so difficult for modern man. We have been trained to believe that we can control our spiritual development through technique and discipline. We think that if we meditate enough, pray enough, study enough, serve enough, we can manufacture a connection with the divine. We approach God like engineers approaching a problem to be solved. This mechanical understanding of spirituality is perhaps the greatest barrier to authentic sacred experience. God is not a machine that responds predictably to the correct inputs. The divine is alive, unpredictable, often appearing in forms we do not expect and certainly do not prefer. Sometimes God comes as loss that strips away everything you thought mattered. Sometimes the divine appears as an illness that forces you to confront your mortality. Sometimes the sacred manifests as a betrayal that shatters your trust in others and yourself. These experiences feel like the opposite of spiritual connection, but they might be the most direct path to the divine you will ever encounter. You see, God is not gentle in the way we imagine gentleness. The divine is not safe in the way we define safety. Real connection with the sacred often feels more like being torn apart than being healed, more like dying than being saved. Because in a sense, that is exactly what is happening. The false self that thinks it can approach God on its own terms must die before the true self can be born. This death is not metaphorical. It is a real dissolution of everything you have used to define yourself. Your beliefs about yourself, your understanding of your purpose, your sense of what makes you valuable, all of this must be surrendered. Not because these things are evil, but because they are too small to contain the vastness of who you actually are. When this surrender finally happens, when you stop trying to be spiritual and simply allow yourself to be, something shifts. The divine that seems so distant, so difficult to reach, reveals itself as the very ground of your being. You discover that you were never separate from God. You were only separate from your willingness to see what was always already there. So here we arrive at the heart of the matter. Everything I have shared with you today points to one simple truth. The right way to connect with God is to stop trying so hard to connect with God. Stop performing your spirituality. Stop pretending to be more enlightened than you are. Stop hiding behind the masks of piety and righteousness and allow yourself to be seen completely as you actually exist. This means embracing your contradictions. It means acknowledging your darkness alongside your light. It means admitting that you do not understand the mystery you are trying to approach. It means becoming small enough, humble enough, honest enough that the divine can finally find room to move within you. The God you have been seeking lives closer than your own breath. Not in your thoughts about the sacred, but in the consciousness that thinks those thoughts. Not in your feelings about the divine, but in the awareness that experiences those feelings. This presence requires no improvement from you, no achievement, no spiritual accomplishment. It asks only for your willingness to be authentically, completely, vulnerably yourself. So stop trying to become someone worthy of God's attention. You already are someone worthy of God's attention. Stop trying to earn divine love. You are already held by divine love. Stop trying to find God somewhere out there in the distance. The sacred is not hiding from you. You have been hiding from it behind all your ideas about what spiritual connection should look like. The invitation is simple. Come home to yourself, all of yourself, and discover that you have never been anywhere else.